All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, and author of Provoked, How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Sign up for the podcast feed at scotthorton.org or scotthortonshow.com. I've got more than 6,000 interviews in the archive for you there going back to 2003. And follow me on all the video sites and X at Scott Horton Show. Hey guys, on the line, I've got Daniel L. Davis. He used to be a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and he is an author. He wrote a great book about, what the hell is it called? 2020 America thing. What is it again?
11th Hour in 2020 America.
The 11th Hour. I don't know how that escaped me, other than I'm old and senile. The 11th Hour in 2020 America, which is a great book. And also, of course, he was the heroic whistleblower on the Afghan War in 2012, as y'all know, and fought under Colonel McGregor in Iraq War I and all this stuff. And also, of course, he hosts Daniel Davis Deep Dive, which is, I think, by far the best military and political analysis of the Ukraine war that you can find anywhere on the YouTubes. And so, yeah, very happy to have you back on the show. How are you?
I'm doing all right, and I'm always grateful to be on your show.
Cool. Well, I, for one, am happy that you didn't get that one job that they were talking about, because I get to interview you now, and I don't think they'd let you be on my show if you had that job. But listen, so I just want to ask you all about what is going on with Ukraine and the talks and everything. What a terrible mess. First of all, can we start with some military analysis here of the battlefield and the four major oblasts, they call them, I guess, provinces or statelets or whatever they're inside Ukraine that are at issue. That is Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson. And how much of them are under the control of the Russians right now? How strong is the Russian army right now in terms of men and materiel? And what about the Ukrainian side? How many divisions do they have left? And how many men's in a division anyway? And what's the status of the war? And then we'll talk all about the talks and all the things. But let me,
Sure.
draw me a picture on the map in my head of what the hell's the deal over there right now.
A lot of the details on some of the questions you ask about, like how many divisions they have, how many are in each division, those are state secrets, so we can only divine the best we can observe from the outside. But we do have some general truisms on both sides of the line that we can say, and that is, we'll look at the Ukraine side first of all. They are losing more men every day than they can replace, even with forced mobilization. They are now looking to have to try and change the law again to allow 18-year-olds to be forced mobilized, which is just the most catastrophic thing you can do, because there is no military solution. You can't possibly change the course, in the fourth year of war by adding the last cohort of anybody that you want, people that you're going to need in the future generations, when you're already having a massive demographic problem that's going to lead well into the future, decades into the future. It's going to cost them this war as. But that's where they're at, because it's either that or their front lines are going to collapse. And so that tells you all you need to know about the state of the Ukraine military, because they don't have enough ammunition, they don't have enough weapons, because all these things that were given in the first 3 years of the war, a great percentage of them have been destroyed in just continuing daily combat, but they're not being replaced anywhere near on a one-to-one basis. So it's a net loss in armor. Armored personnel carriers, artillery systems, and of course manpower. So they're declining in every category you can imagine. On the other side of the line, you have nearly the opposite. Russia continues to grow and to get larger. Its industrial capacity continues to expand, and now then they're producing more vehicles than they lose, or else they're refurbishing some of the others. One thing that a lot of people don't really understand is when you hear like a tank was destroyed on the battlefield, that doesn't mean it's like lost forever. That means they'll tow it back to their repair shops, take the spare parts, refurbish it, and send it back out there. So that is usual. There's very few of the absolute catastrophic losses. So even though you've seen a large number of both Russian and Ukrainian vehicles destroyed, the Russian side has the manufacturing capacity to refurbish them in its own country, whereas the Ukraine side doesn't. And sometimes they can ship it off to places like Poland and Romania to where there are NATO workshops and they can get things done. But it's a very slow process, and it's hard for them to even get it off the front lines and drag it all the way back there, whereas Russia has a lot of those facilities in the zone where the fighting is happening. And then, of course, their industrial capacity. Manpower-wise, Russia continues to expand because while the morale and the motivation on the Ukraine side is continuing to dwindle, it's rising dramatically on the Russian side, not surprisingly, because when people see that they are winning and they're succeeding, they're winning on the diplomatic front, economic front, and on the literal front lines, et cetera, then it's a lot easier to have guys to recruit because they want to be part of something great, something they call World War II the Great Patriotic War. And now then this generation is seeing, they're on the cusp of winning something big. And so there's lots of people that are signing up willingly. They don't even have to mobilize anyone. They have enough volunteers each month. And now then they're at about 1.5 million active duty Army, which is about 500,000 more than their armed forces had when they started the war in 2022. That also tells you all you need to know from the Russian side. So militarily, nothing has changed for the better for Ukraine since you and I started talking about this stuff. The balance of power disparity between the two sides has grown in Russia's favor. So that kind of lays the foundation for what you want to talk about next, which is on the diplomatic front.
Yeah. Well, now on the war, though, itself, I mean, one thing is, of course, the Director of National Intelligence put out the threat assessment in February where they said essentially what you just said, only more boiled down, but that the Russians are ascendant and they have all the momentum on the battlefield and the Ukrainians are fighting, defensively. But, there's the big New York Times story, which a lot of this had already been reported by the New York Times. In fact, I have a lot of it in my book about the Americans not just providing intelligence, but really running the entire war from Germany and all this kind of thing. But one of the things they really highlight in there, and this has always been part of our discussion going back, is, the Russians are right next door and they have a large, obviously it's a bigger country with a bigger economy and already a large manufacturing type base that can be turned toward war, and they have all these advantages. On the other side, the West has a lot of money and high-tech shit, right? And so that New York Times article said that, hey, those HIMARS really did make a difference. Those Russians learned that with American outer space satellites spying down and passing all the exact coordinates around, that the Ukrainians can then reach out and touch them pretty good, and did it a lot. And then also they says in the news, they gave them the ATACMs that are even better and longer range. And what was it that I read, Danny, that said that, hey, that whole new giant domestic drone industry in Ukraine, the CIA built that, of course. This is a massive project. I forgot where I read that. Was it the Wall Street Journal or the Times? That had a giant thing about, that was a CIA thing, and that they're just cranking these things out. Remember, you debated the Warhawk lady, and she said, well, we just gotta kajigger a new thingamajig out there on the battlefield, and that is what's going to turn the tide. And I'm only very closely paraphrasing her. I forgot the exact quote, but it was something like that. But maybe that's right. Maybe, German and American know-how and silicon wafers and spy satellites are enough to, after all, I mean, we're having this conversation, deep into the third year of the war here. So, or into the fourth year now, right? It's been 3 years. So maybe the Ukrainians with American military and financial support are tougher than you thought. And maybe, and isn't it the case that Trump is still backing them, right? America's still shipping them weapons, and have they really curtailed all the intelligence sharing and everything, or what's the status of that? And, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here, but I must have some kind of point, the fact that we're even still discussing this, really.
Yeah, there are definitely some caveats to that. So let's try to take that down here. First of all, this claim about HIMARS and ATACMs being effective. When was the last time you heard about a HIMARS attack on Russia that being effective? It's been months. They still launch them periodically, but what the Times doesn't seem to recognize or is willing to acknowledge is that has been a major, major problem for the United States, because by giving these HIMARS and the ATACMs, which have similar guidance systems, is that we have given Russia every opportunity to learn how to defeat our missiles. So they don't merely shoot them down with air defense, which is a good portion of them, but it's electronic warfare signals. They've learned how to defeat our guidance systems. So now then those missiles hardly ever strike the target when they're used, and very often they don't the Ukraine side doesn't even use them anymore because it's kind of pointless. So now then, I mean, well, just kind of as an aside, now let's say that we suddenly get into a war with somebody, China, Russia, North Korea, whatever, and we have to bring those missiles into use for our own defense. And now then the enemy is already going to know how to defeat them. So they're going to be much less powerful than they would have been before, and that the HIMARS were when they first got used, because it took Russia a while to figure them out. And they did make a real pain point for Russia at first, but now that it's virtually meaningless. And you talk about the drones. Yeah, that lady, she was talking about the thingamajiggers and all that. But like she did, the New York Times, they don't think about the other half of the equation. Russia has also been continuing to work on their drone industry. They released a new category of the Garin 3, or at least they talked about it in some of the Russian media and their military journals. This past week I saw where they have a new category. It's the Garin 3. It's extremely fast. It's like up to 500 to 600 kilometers per hour. It can loiter for like 21 hours, something like that. It has a much higher payload. It can do more than the previous ones. And so now that they have more of them, they still have the Garin 2s, which is their second iteration of those things, and they have a lot of those. They're cheaper, they're slower, but they have a lot more of them. Every time you send one of those, you have to knock it down with something. So if you launch up there a $40,000-$50,000 drone, and they have to use a $1 or $2 million missile to knock it down, guess who that plays in the favor of? Not our side. So even when Russia loses a lot of those, the cost of the Ukraine side is higher. And then, of course, they follow up with the Kinzhal missiles and several of the other cruise missiles Russia has. And now then there's no more missiles. And we saw that in Kiev this past week, where there was this one real graphic image of a Russian missile launching down and striking straight into the capital city of Ukraine, and nothing intercepted it. One of the missiles that misfired, one of the interceptor missiles, hit an apartment building in Ukraine. So they actually blew themselves up, and that we see that on image. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can see the missile missing a target, not hitting anything, or maybe it just malfunctioned and it landed in Kiev and killed a bunch of people. So those are the things you have to look at, in addition to the frontline movements, which I continue to talk about, how Russia is taking this methodical, slow, grinding pace, which doesn't take much territory, but it does kill a lot of Ukrainian men. And that's what the people in the West don't understand. Russia's fighting a different kind of war. They're not as focused on the territory. They say this openly, but we never listen to them. They're focused on destroying the Ukrainian armed forces, and they have been for a long time. If they destroy enough of the Ukrainian armed forces and they eventually break somewhere, then they just get all of the territory. They don't have to fight for every inch of it. They can whittle down the defense until it's weak enough, until finally it breaks or they put enough pressure on it, and then they get to literally drive into the interior of the country, taking whatever they want. That's what Russia is seeking for, and that big break hasn't happened yet, but that doesn't mean that the thinning out of the Ukraine side isn't continuing on.
Mm. Well, it said that they've known that Trump was going to win for a year, and that he wants to end the war. He wants a ceasefire. He wants the war to stop. He wants to prove he can stop it as part of proving that he would have prevented it from breaking out. And so if their strategy has not shifted to take as much territory as we can before the ceasefire, and the strategy is still, nope, just keep grinding them up and don't focus so much on the percentage of the 4 big oblasts taken, because it'll all just come in time, then that really spells absolute doom for any American peace effort here, right?
Point. You asked a minute ago what percentage of those 4 oblasts are still under Ukrainian control, and Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson in the south are still considerably. They're still large chunks. I mean, hundreds of square miles that are still under Ukrainian control.
Right.
Dmitry Peskov yesterday answered a question to some reporters in Moscow who said, what about this deal with Trump? Is it going to end the war? And he says, well, it will, as long as the Ukrainian army puts down its weapons, and completely withdraws from all four of the administrative borders of those places.
Yeah.
That is an ask that I don't think anybody that's actually paying attention thinks that Ukraine will agree to. So I think, to your point a second ago, Russia fully expects them to not do that. Their position is still ungiving and unwavering, the Russian side. They say all of that, or we keep fighting. I interviewed on my show yesterday Dmitry Polyanskiy, the deputy UN ambassador for Russia, and I point blank asked him, if you don't get what you're asking for diplomatically, what will the Russians do, and will they fight until those borders or keep going? And he said nothing has changed in any of this. We have continued to fight. We've said we're going to, and we will either get what we want at the negotiating table or we will take it by force. And everything you see on the ground validates what he said there.
Well, so, I mean, get back to the talks in a minute, but so if they, presuming that they just keep going, it could take them a very long time to finish taking Zaporozhye and Kherson at this rate. And I understand what you're saying, that, well, that rate could accelerate,
Well, see, it's
at
more
some
than that,
point,
though.
but
See, because you can't talk about that part of it unless you also talk about what Trump has said this week, that he's ready to walk, and he's signaling in every way possible with the vice president, the secretary of state, and he himself, that if he doesn't get the deal he wants, maybe within days, possibly even this weekend, then he's ready to walk.
well, and so
if
what
he
difference would
does
that?
then
What?
then the whole change on the battlefield gets much worse for Ukraine, because not only will they not get anything, but now they've lost a psychological backing of the United States, and I don't think that this thing is going to go on for another year or two.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's the question, is what literal difference would it make? I understand what you're saying about morale and the whole political equation would change. But what would literally change on the ground if the HIMARS and the American intel isn't making a difference for the Ukrainians? Then what difference would it make if they called it off? There's clearly
there's
some in the
still
Ukrainian military want to keep fighting.
Yeah, there is still some, because you remember Trump turned it off for a little while, but then he turned it back on. And when he say turned it back on, that just means what was in the pipeline from the Biden administration. Because you may remember they did this big, I think it was like $8 billion surge of promising equipment that would have to be delivered over a number of months just before they went out of office in the early part of January of this year. So it's going to take a while for that to unwind. But there is nothing new in the pipeline. But if you suddenly cut off even that, then Europe is either going to have to substantially increase its amount, or physically on the battlefield, they won't even be able to hold the lines. I mean, that's why this has a physical implication.
Yeah. All right. So, boy. All right. Now, I guess let's just go through the different positions here. Let's start with Trump's position. What exactly is it that he's offered? Because a lot of this has been made pretty public about what his stance is, what he's willing to agree to, what he wants the Ukrainians to agree to, what he wants the Russians to agree to.
Yeah, there was a published, I guess, a couple of days ago, what's been reported as a 7-point plan by the Trump administration that he has said, yes, here's my plan. And those 7 points are: one, recognition of Crimea as Russian territory, de facto recognition of the other 4 territories, no NATO, lifting sanctions on Russia that have been imposed since 2014, a resumption of economic relations between Russia and the United States, a minerals deal for the U.S. on the Ukraine, which is nothing but a loss for them. I don't know why they would agree to that. And then a shared control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Those are the 7 points that apparently are in Trump's plan that he said he's going to release potentially today or tomorrow. We'll see if that happens. Russia would obviously like a lot of those, but it's not enough for them. And I also asked this of the deputy UN ambassador yesterday. I said, Putin has said that demilitarization and denazification are also part of the deal, which this plan doesn't address. And so the question is, would y'all even accept this? And they said, we'll accept those things on there more or less, as long as demilitarization and denazification, meaning they'll have to get rid of most of their military so that they don't even have the capacity to threaten Russia in the future. And then they have to actually get rid of what the Russian side says are Nazi elements within their country, like the Azov Brigade and some administrators who were part of what the Russians claim were atrocities against the Russian-speaking people of Ukraine earlier in the war, during the Civil War part, et cetera. And again, those are things that it's just almost inconceivable that Ukraine would ever agree to. So everything points to then the war is going to continue on, and Russia is just going to try to get a military victory.
Yeah. So, and now is one of the Russian demands that Ukraine and America both recognize their de jure control over the four provinces?
No, the U.S. side says de jure control of Crimea we're willing to do, but de facto over the other four provinces. Russia has not spoken on what their requirements are because they say we honestly don't care what you think. They're already Russian territory. It's in our constitution, etc. So that doesn't seem to be as big of an issue for the Russian side, and they haven't addressed it one way or the other that I've seen.
So that, in other words, they just want the territory. They're saying remove your troops from it. We'll occupy all of it. Belongs to
That is
us.
correct.
But they don't. They're not saying it matters whether we or Kiev
Right.
officially recognize it as their territory. That's just something that Trump is offering from his side.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, but then, you know, the Russian demand that the Ukrainians have to withdraw from all the territory that they haven't lost yet is obviously, if it's not meant to be a poison pill, it's just unachievable demand, right? They're not going to do that.
Well, here's the reality. The reality is if you don't agree to those terms and withdraw from that territory, then you will be compelled to leave that territory and lose much, much more in the process. That's what nobody in the West is willing to come to grips with. Nobody in Kiev that's in charge will come to grips with. They think that it's a poison pill, but if you don't take that poison pill, then you're going to get your arm chainsawed off and you're going to get your leg cut off. It's going to be much, much worse to not take the pill. And Russia appears willing to have the negotiated settlement on terms that are not their maximalist. But if they don't get them, then they will take everything. And that's just the reality that I just baffles me why, especially the West, just won't recognize it. And based on some things that they have sent out as a counterpoint to Trump's 7-point plan, that I saw that just came out this morning. Maybe it came out last night, but I saw it this morning. It's just fantasy land. It's just like, no, we're going to do it the way we want. We want a ceasefire. We want American security guarantees for Ukraine. We don't want to give over any kind of territory, or at least not admit anything, and just stuff that Russia is categorically against. So it's just fantasy, meaning that we are still so far apart on the Western side, not about the Russian side. That's obvious. But I mean, even where Trump is and where the European Union is after all these rounds of negotiation, to include London on Wednesday, it just shows that we're miles apart. And so the Russians are going, yeah, if y'all can't even come to an agreement on your side, then we're just going to keep going militarily.
Yeah. And now, so what do you know about the Russian politics surrounding the question of extending their goals as far as Kharkiv and Odessa?
There are many in Russia that are adamant that they want those. That's why they say they don't want Ukraine to take this poison pill, because they say then that will leave us short of our necessary objectives. Because they say, listen, there's, obviously the Russian speakers in the four provinces, but there are substantial portions of the population in the next four provinces over that are also Russian speakers. And they said, we are not going to just let a new line be drawn here and leave all of our other compatriots on the other side of that line, many of which are in Odessa, many of which are in the Kharkiv area and Dnipro I can't even say that, Dnipro province, some call it. So there's a lot. And so they don't want there to be a negotiated settlement because they want to take that by force so that they can protect all of the ethnic Russians up to the Dnieper River. We'll see how it works out, because if we don't agree to that, if Ukraine doesn't agree to those four provinces, then I think that they're going to lose all 8 of them, maybe even more than that.
Yeah. I mean, I did predict that in my speech like 3 days after the invasion, that the Russians, it's the same as if we're criticizing American foreign policy, or it's the self-licking ice cream cone, man. One intervention leads to the next one and leads to the next one. The Russian-leaning parties used to win elections. That's why America had to overthrow the government over there all the time. Now the Russians absorbing everybody in the Far East and South means that they're leaving a much smaller minority of Russian speakers behind. So what's the solution to that? Keep going to the river. You don't expect us to abandon all the poor people of Dnipropetrovsk. And so on they go. And then, you could also see just the this is the way that they talk about it. It's their historical claim to Odessa and Kharkiv. Those were originally Russian cities, and they want them back. And then also, it's a great way to screw over what's left of rump Ukraine, which will not be denazified, right? Like, what's left of Ukraine is going to be ruled by Nazis. You mentioned the Azov Battalion. Well, they just made the 3rd Separate Infantry Division, which was the Azov Battalion led by Andriy Beletsky. They just promoted the whole thing for what it means in practical purposes. I don't know exactly, but it's gone now from a battalion to a regiment to the 3rd Separate Infantry Division. It's now called the 3rd Army Corps. And so that's a higher level of status. And this guy Beletsky, if he survives the war, I get a Google alert for all of his exploits, and they always trumpet it really big in the press when him and his guys, take a small village somewhere or fend off a Russian assault somewhere, mostly fighting in the north. And so, geez, if we're going to be left with a rump Nazified Ukraine in, based out of Galicia and Volhynia, then we should take Odessa away so that now that they're landlocked and won't pose a threat to the Black Sea and will have to be the Europeans' problem, and all of that, and so you could see how by their logic, once you invade the Donbass, you got to keep going and going and going and going. In fact, how long do we expect them to tolerate a Beletsky-led rump Ukraine if we fast forward this story 5 years? It's going to be another war anyway. So by the logic of the self-licking ice cream cone, they're just going to have to march all the way to Romania and Poland, right? Why not?
There are elements in Russia that suggest that very thing. That they don't want to get a war with NATO if they can avoid it, but they're actually not afraid of it. And they say if Ukraine will never agree to it, and I actually asked that also of the ambassador yesterday. I said, what if you get all the way to the Dnieper and they still don't denazify like that? He said, we'll continue the fight until we have achieved all of our objectives. That's how he answered the question, which is, to your point, exactly. If you get up to the river and there's still Nazis in charge, or as Russia would define them anyway, then they will apparently continue on. And of course, if you've gotten that far, then what's left to defend anything in the West? We just got to look at this in a ugly practical matter. People say, well, it took them 3 years to get this 20-something%, and it'll take another 3 years. It doesn't work like that. It's not a linear process. And if the one side keeps getting bigger and the other gets getting stronger, there will come a point when it breaks. And then all of a sudden it's like a water over the dam. And now then they can just sweep across the whole thing. We saw that happen in France in 1940. Exactly. The entire country collapsed once the Anglo-Saxon armies got penetrated in the rear. The whole war was over after that point. So there is historical precedence, and there's no guarantees in anything.
Hang on just 1 second for me here. You guys, I'm so proud to announce the publication of the Libertarian Institute's 14th book. It's Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War, Undue Influence, Deceptions, and the Neocon Energy Agenda by Gary Vogler, former senior oil consultant and deputy senior oil advisor for U.S. forces during Iraq War II. Remember how I wrote in Enough Already about how Ahmed Chalabi sold the neoconservatives on a plan to rebuild the old British oil pipeline from Mosul and Kirkuk, Iraq, to Haifa, Israel, if they would only get the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein for him? And how they bought it because they are as dumb as they are corrupt? Well, Gary was there. As senior civilian consultant to the DoD and Iraqi oil ministry, he had a unique window and experience witnessing the Pentagon neocons and their machinations on behalf of Israel before and during that war. And it turns out that even though they did not get their pipeline, as Vogler demonstrates, the neocons and their Likudnik bosses figured out an effective plan B anyway. You are going to love Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler, available everywhere. Check it out along with our other great books at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. One, they know they need to, and two, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. Well, look, I mean, it's the West is where the forests and the swamps are. So if you want to have an insurgency after the army's broken, that's where to have one. And the Carpathian Mountains and all that, the CIA.
Yeah, you can, but man, who wins on that? Why would you want a situation where you have to get into an insurgency in your own country indefinitely, however long Russia would want to pay that price?
And then Nazis are romantic types,
right now,
you know?
Avoid it.
Look, America the CIA backed the Nazi insurgency against the Soviet Union through 1959, after the dawn of the Cold War there. And they talked about this at the start of the war. Everybody expected the Ukrainian military to be broken, and this whole thing was going to be a Red Dawn, Mujahideen, Rambo 3 type insurgency from the beginning. They all invoked the Afghan model, not our Afghan model, what Osama got us to do to us. But no, the other Afghan model where America and the CIA and Osama got the Soviets to do that to themselves back in the 1980s. And so that was plan A. Plan B was, oh, great. The Ukrainian army actually isn't broken into little pieces and can continue fighting as a state army for 3 years. So they could go back to plan A. And they said all along, and I guess this isn't Trump's policy, but it's probably the Joint Staff's policy still, is to extend the war, to bleed Russia. The more they spend money, the more they spend money. And that's a net loss for them, and that's smart by us.
Plan.
Huh?
That's 100% the Europeans' plan, guaranteed.
Yeah. Well, so, geez, I don't know. Now, let's talk about Zelensky, because he's obviously in a very difficult position here. I believe Boris Johnson when Boris Johnson... Well, I don't believe the part where he says, hey, that wasn't my fault. I disagree with that. But I think it's pretty clear the journalism about how he helped ruin those peace talks in the early months of the war. But his excuse also was believable, which is it was the right-wing nationalists. They refused to accept any kind of negotiation. And there's a long history of that going back to Poroshenko as well. And it was Dmitry Yarash who threatened to hang Zelensky from a tree on the main drag in Kiev if he dared to try to negotiate with the Russians back in 2019. And, there's a very real threat of violence against him if he would negotiate. I think that's clear, from before the war and after. And that was believable by Boris Johnson. And after all, they've been fighting for years and lost a hell of a lot of guys. And it sucks really bad to lose, and especially when you haven't all the way been defeated yet. And so the way that the Nazis put it is if you negotiate now, then that means that all the guys who've died in the war so far had died in vain. So far, they haven't died in vain yet. But
that's true. They already have died in vain, by the way.
I'm just saying, tell that to the Nazis. That ain't the way they see it,
But I can't stop but add the next part that they won't, which is, and then you're going to condemn to unnecessary death thousands and possibly hundreds of thousands of more who are alive right now and would love a chance to live. So you want to condemn them to death, go down that path.
Right, which is their thing. Glory to the heroes, man. That's what they say. So,
yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a major problem. And then I don't know what other incentives, because it does seem to be mysterious. I think people in my audience might wonder, why is Zelensky not taking the opportunity to hide behind as much of Trump's skirt as he can and get the best deal he can? Seems like possibly they could get some European troops in there, which seems silly to me. They're going to fight in the future for a war that they won't fight now. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But still, like, he doesn't seem to be doing the best to get what he can get. It seems more like he's simply being intransigent. And,
oh yeah, he's doing the opposite. He's doing everything to sabotage any possibility for a peaceful negotiation.
Well, but I mean, doesn't that mean then he thinks he has other options then? Or what does he think?
Either he has other options, or I've heard from people in a position to know claim that he doesn't have other options because, as you mentioned there, he could be swinging from a tree in the Maidan. From a pole in the Maidan, I guess. Because he's being threatened by even his own supporters that if you go down this path, you won't survive it. And out of self-preservation, he's going down this path, which is a horrendous thing. I don't care if it's true or not, but for a man to say, so that I can live, I'm going to keep going down a fictitious road that's going to keep tens of thousands of my countrymen dying every month, he deserves to be condemned. I think it's terrible.
Yeah, this whole thing represents a real betrayal of the Ukrainian people, especially by the United States, by Joe Biden and his government, and but by the Brits too. Did you see the new thing by Kit Clarenberg? I'm trying to arrange to get him on the show. I don't know if it's going to work out. But Kit has this new thing. We already knew the story. There was a big thing in the New York Times about this about a year ago or so. I have a thing about it in my book. But Kit has a new thing about the British role in training the Ukrainian Marines that they sent in this absolutely horrifically failed adventure to try to cross the Dnieper River to take the left bank of Kherson and then move from there on to Sevastopol, supposedly. And
you talk about the Cranky operation?
Yes. I'm not sure if I got all the names right, but you seem to know better than me on that. I forgot.
Yeah, I was just...
Oh, I do have it right here. What is it called? I do have the article here. It's yes. Would you say cranky?
Yeah, cranky.
Yeah. So this has been going on, and so he just goes to show the British role in all the planning and the training. I guess they had the special boat services, train these guys up and whatever. And somebody gave a bunch of documents to Kit Clarenberg. He does great stuff, man. He gets great documents from the Brits, especially exposing their nefarious role in all of this. And essentially what they're talking about essentially is this completely ridiculous plan to just send these guys straight into the dragon's teeth. And then once it's like some Bay of Pigs stuff where the plan breaks down, but they keep going anyway.
Yes.
So they don't have their beachhead, but the whole thing was dependent on them getting their beachhead. But then they just keep pouring guys in and they just keep dying and dying for months and months. They got no air cover. They're just getting picked off by drones and artillery and whatever. And we already knew what an absolute horror show it was. But then here we have the British role in just like the American Democrats, just pushing them into this, making them keep going even after somebody should have called this whole thing off. It's not working. Our plan didn't work. Now it's months later and they're still doing it. He talks about guys who are just left behind. No one's coming to evacuate them out of there, so they're just blowing their own brains out as they're just sitting there dying on the shore of the river and all this stuff. Just absolute shit show, as Barack Obama would call it, you know?
Yeah, it's I mean, I was noticing that when the operation first started. I'll never forget. There was an article by David Axe in Forbes, which he said, everybody's saying that the 2023 offensive didn't work, but now here Ukraine has scratched out a beachhead on the Russian side of the Dnieper River at Krinky, and they are now putting Russia's whole southern flank at risk. And I'm like, dude, all you got to do is look at a map, and you see that even if they get across the river, then what? The same reason their 2023, the entire offensive was utterly destroyed, is still in effect down here, except you would have to go over a much larger area of open, even if you could ferry people across the river, which you couldn't. And so the whole thing was doomed from the beginning. And I was just aghast when I saw the Ukraine just continue to put men after men after men into this just hellhole. I mean, it was worse than Bakhmut. It was worse than the Kursk. And those were two horrible ones. But that just shows you the generalship on the Ukraine side and the just just unbelievably bad generalship and decision by the commander-in-chief of Zelensky, who's always talked about being like a Churchillian figure, but man, he never had any tactical victories other than and it wasn't his, of course, but the 2022 victories in Kherson City, where Ukraine did force the Russians across the river, and in Kharkiv that year. That's it. They never had another one, and there's no reason to think they ever will.
You know, the Ukrainians, I could see how, of course, from their point of view, they're the stars of this movie. You know, all this revolves around them and what's happening to them and all that. But I wonder, surely if they don't get it now, they will get it in the near future. They will understand what role they played in the American government's imagination here. Where they're like, they remind me of when David Petraeus started passing out $100 bills and bribing the local Sunni chiefs who had already turned on al-Qaeda anyway in Iraq War II. And he said, you know what, we're going to call you the concerned local citizens and the sons of Iraq. And you're going to be the good guys now. And we promise we're going to somehow get Nouri al-Maliki and his Shiite government to give y'all good jobs or something. And then at the end of the war, oh yeah, all that, yeah, no, we never could figure out how to get any of that done. Good luck, you guys, and then left. And not that I'm criticizing the withdrawal, but I'm just saying Petraeus was in no position to make any promises to them, especially since he was the guy who turned the Badr Brigade into the Iraqi army, which is kind of an exclusivist Shiite organization, you understand. And so, Sons of Iraq, whatever your name is, see ya, pal. Like, those guys are, if you ask anyone in Washington, D.C., tell us all about the Sons of Iraq that you care so much about and make lots of big promises to. They wouldn't even remember what I was talking about anymore, right? Like, they have no idea.
Well, they would end the story where Petraeus started it. Oh, yeah, they turned the tide here, and we recognize all this. And then you say, yeah, and then what happened to them? Then you just get this deer in the headlight look. Oh, what do you mean? Yeah, they have no idea, nor do they care.
Yep. It's the same thing with the Ukrainians here. I mean, I have example after example in the book of American politicians and pundits and government officials and whoever talking about, we are getting such great bang for our buck in this war. They all say it like that. Not all, but many of them. Because Russians are getting killed and no Americans are getting killed. So it's rad. And then a lot of times they won't even mention at all that, well, of course, a lot of Ukrainians are dying, and that's sad. They don't even say that. They don't even say that part. And Eric Swalwell, the Democrat congressman, is the most recent example I have from just a couple of weeks ago. Did the exact same thing. And I'm just thinking that, like, they're going to remember that. Nazis love a good stab in the back story, and they absolutely are being stabbed in the back by the United States of America here. Set them up like the Bay of Pigs, right? Like the Shiite uprising in 1991. And then, good luck, you guys. We're not coming for you.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell was the other one on the Democrat Republican side that was just screaming that deal, especially early in the war. Made me sick.
I mean, there's going to be trouble from that. I'm predicting blowback.
Yeah, I think you're right. It historically has, and why wouldn't it here?
Yeah. I'm especially worried about this Beletsky guy. I think, Dmitry Yarash, I don't know where Andrew Perubi is right now, laying low somewhere. I don't know about Dmitry Yarash either. Those are two powerful and charismatic Nazis. But Andriy Beletsky, he is the most insane lunatic of them all as far as like his speeches about the great Aryan mission of the organism of the Ukrainian state and all his, crazed Nazi stuff. And then he is like the big war hero of Kharkiv right now, and I think has a big political future in front of him. If he doesn't take a bullet, then, he is going to be a major player in Ukrainian politics, and I think that's going to be a real problem. And hey, Andrew Perubi, he was the Speaker of the Rada for like 6 years or something, so I don't think he's gone either. I think a lot of the more radical forces are the ones who fought in the war, and the ones who didn't come back dead are going to come back, idolized. They're going to have a real problem going forward with that.
Yeah, there's just so many problems here. It's just shameful to the West writ large.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, I'm going to let you go, but just to recap here, just to make sure I understand, you think that Trump can't make a deal here. The Russians are just going to keep going, and the Ukrainians are going to lose, and probably all the way to the river, and then even Odessa, and maybe, I guess at that point, you're taking Odessa, you might as well keep going until you get to the Transnistria there, that little strip of Russian-controlled territory on the Moldovan-Ukrainian border. And all that. Is that what you're seeing here? And
Well,
Trump's just going to turn
I
his
would
back?
just slightly characterize it differently. That not that Trump will fail to get to a negotiated deal, but that the Ukraine and European side will not agree to a negotiated deal, even though the Trump could probably get some kind of an agreement with Russia. They won't have it, and so he will not succeed. But I think he knows that, and I think he will walk probably before the end of the next week. I think that he'll say, "That's it, I'm done." I think he'll really do it.
Mm. And then, well, what can Europe really bring to bear? It's easy to scoff, but what the hell? They're first world countries, right?
Yeah, we'll see, but I think we will. I think we're going to find out. I think they'll try to figure out something if Trump walks. I think that right now that there's many people. I'll never forget, Scott, when Trump had negotiated an end to the Afghanistan war in, I think it was February 2020. And that we were supposed to be out by May of 2021, and that was the deal we had. I think it was called the Doha Accords. When he didn't win the election and Biden came in, there were many people in the Pentagon that were telling the Afghans, "Yeah, don't worry about that. As soon as Biden gets into office, he'll just end that and he'll get rid of it, and we'll continue on." And they all believed it. But Biden said, "Yeah, no, we'll just stick with that. We'll do a terrible job getting out, and we'll change the exit date, but we're going to still get out." It's like the worst of all possibilities. But I see something similar happening here. That people are going, "Yeah, I mean, Trump says that, but he's not going to really do it. At the end of the day, he'll just keep it going, and he'll get mad about something that Putin does or something." And I think that they're misreading it. I think that he'll actually walk on this one, because otherwise, why would he own something that is a disaster and embrace it? Because it can't work.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. He has no cards to play, right? He already promised to lift sanctions. You said going back to 2014. That's a pretty sweet deal, Vlad.
It's huge. Yeah.
And yeah, like it pissed me off if the Russians didn't say, taking this opportunity to try to repair our relationship with the United States of America might just be worth it, guys. Let's do this. Trump, they're never going to get a better opportunity to fix this than making a deal with Trump right now. And then I could see how, what you're saying, that Ukraine and the EU, they don't have to go along with that. Although then again, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll
like
see.
You're saying,
maybe
see
they
what
will. Maybe they'll collapse. I mean, they're not exactly, iron backbones and spines and stuff. We'll see what they do, but I fear that they'll try to muddle through and it'll just get more people killed in Ukraine.
Yeah. But on the other side of that, Trump doesn't really have any threats to make, right?
No,
he promised something like he's going to put 100% tariff on any country that trades with Russia at all or something like that. He's not going to do that, right? Like that's how far down the crazy sanctions ladder we are now, where that's his last option left, is to make it illegal for any other country to trade with Russia, or then they won't be able to trade with us. I mean, that just sounds, I guess he could, but
that would hurt us more than them anyway. And they're, if not sanction proof, they're very sanction resistant because they've got decades of experience with it. So that would be bad for us. And I don't think Trump will do that.
And that could even be like the last straw for America's sanctions regime, where just so much of the rest of the world says, fine, then we'll just trade with them and not you. And we'll happily make that choice at this point. Screw you guys, Yeah,
nobody wants to make that choice because of the size of our market. But if push comes to shove, I think people are eventually going to do it.
Yeah. But so that's all Trump has to offer is carrots and no real sticks. And the Russians, they still have all these incentives to keep going. And they've got the Europeans. Hell, they could be run by secret Russian agents at this point if it actually is more helpful to the Russians to keep the war going and end up taking all of what they want. Then, they have the European and Ukrainian intransigence as their excuse to just keep going now, even if the world superpower is seeking a deal.
Yep. Well, we'll unfortunately see pretty soon, I think.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, man, for coming on the show and talking about this stuff with us.
You bet, Scott. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. All right, you guys, that is the great Daniel L. Davis. The 11th Hour in 2020 America is the name of his book. See, I remembered that after 45 minutes. And you got to watch the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. It's the best show on the YouTube, and I know there's a lot of them. Like and subscribe. Thanks for listening to The Scott Horton Show, which can be heard on APS Radio News at scotthorton.org, scotthortonshow.com, and the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org.